150 motorcycles in the parking lot of Millbrook Elementary School was not something Millbrook, Indiana had ever seen. Not on a Tuesday. Not in September. Not for an 8-year-old boy standing on a sidewalk in a blue t-shirt holding his broken wrist against his chest. Watching the lot fill up like something out of a dream he would have been afraid to describe out loud. Every engine had cut out, every rider had gone still. And in the silence that followed, the deep, unhurried silence of 150 men who did not need to announce themselves, a boy named Ethan Cole stood on a curb and looked at his cast. The cast that, 72 hours earlier, had been blank. Not a single name on it. Not one. It started 3 days before that. It started with a man who stopped for bad coffee and stayed for something he hadn't planned on. Ray Kowalski had been riding since he was 17 years old, and the 36 years between then and now had left their mark on him the way weather leaves marks on exposed stone. His beard was iron gray. His hands had scar tissue across the knuckles from a decade of working engines he should have let someone else touch. The patch on the back of his vest, the one that made people in diners choose tables on the other side of the room, had been there since he was 26. It didn't make him walk differently. It didn't make him speak louder, but it was there, and people saw it first. He was 53 years old, and he was built like a man who had decided long ago not to apologize for the amount of space he occupied. He'd come down from Chicago on the long route, no particular hurry. There was a memorial ride in Cincinnati in 4 days. A brother named Hector who died of a heart attack in June, doing what he loved, which was riding I-70 at sunrise. And Ray had given himself the time to get there the slow way, through the flat belly of Indiana, where the fields went on longer than a man could hold his attention. He'd stopped at a gas station on the south edge of Millbrook, not because his tank demanded it, but because his back had been saying something for the last hour that his pride had been refusing to hear. He filled the tank. He went inside and got a coffee from the machine near the door, the kind of coffee that tasted like the machine had made peace with failure sometime in the previous decade. He carried it outside into the September sun and leaned against the building and drank it slowly, watching a school bus hiss through the intersection 200 yards away. He had a son once. Marcus. Marcus had been 9 years old when a man who had consumed 11 beers made a left turn that killed him on a Tuesday afternoon 11 years ago. Ray had done the work, the therapy, the chapter, the years, and it didn't consume him the way it used to. But September was different. September was school supplies and new sneakers and the smell of pencil shavings and cut grass. And in September, there was always a moment when the weight of it came back. Not as a hammer, but as a hand on the shoulder. He was about to walk back to his bike when he saw the boy. Before you find out what Ray did next, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments below. Right now, there are people watching this from everywhere, and I want to know where you are. City and state, anywhere in the world. I read every single one. Now, back to Millbrook, Indiana. Because what Ray Kowalski had just noticed was going to change things for a lot of people, starting with one small boy on a curb. His name was Ethan Cole. He was 8 years old. He was small for 8, the kind of small that was still catching up. He was wearing a blue t-shirt with a bleach stain near the collar that someone had tried to disguise and hadn't quite managed. His sneakers were the wrong kind for September, too light, already scuffed through to the toe, because when his mother had bought them in August, she had not known yet that they would be moving again. His left arm was in a plaster cast that ran from his wrist to just below his elbow. The cast was white, completely uniformly white, not a single mark on it except for one small thing on the inside of the wrist, a purple heart, drawn in marker, the lines slightly uneven. The kind of drawing that is made by an adult's hand trying to be quick and reassuring at the same time. His mother had drawn it the night they got back from urgent care. It was the only signature the cast had ever received. Ethan had been in Millbrook for 22 days. Before Millbrook, there had been Terre Haute. Before Terre Haute, there had been Fort Wayne. His mother worked hard and she moved when the work needed her to move, and Ethan had moved with her enough times that the part of him that used to walk up to new kids and say his name had gone quiet. It was easier to wait. It was easier to watch and see if someone came to you. In Millbrook so far, nobody had come to him. He had broken his wrist on day 6, not at school, just at home, on the driveway, on the bike he'd been riding since he was 5. He'd taken a corner too fast, and the wheel slipped, and he went down on the heel of his hand. His mother had taken him to urgent care and held his hand through the whole thing And that night, she'd drawn the small purple heart where he could see it when he turned his arm. He had come back to school with the cast 4 days later, and he had watched what happened when you came back to school with the cast. He watched how kids crowded around. He watched the shoving to be first with the marker, the names in different colors, the little drawings that only made sense to the person who drew them. He had seen a girl named Madison come back after spring break with a cast so covered in ink it looked like a piece of art. She had turned it slowly for the class like she was showing them a trophy. Ethan had positioned himself near groups of kids. He had made his cast visible. He had waited. On Thursday, a boy named Connor had looked at the cast during reading circle. Ethan had felt it, the specific awareness of being looked at, and he'd looked back with something open in his expression that he hadn't meant to let show. Connor had looked away, not cruelly, just away, back to his book. That was, somehow, worse than cruelty. Cruelty at least meant you existed. By the time Ethan sat on that curb on a Tuesday afternoon, he had stopped holding his arm at angles that invited attention. He ran his thumb along the plaster the way someone touches a bruise. Not to hurt it, just to confirm it's still there. The kids came out of the building in groups the way they always did, finding their people, their voices carrying across the parking lot in that particular frequency that only children can produce. No one stopped at the curb where Ethan was sitting. One cluster of 4 boys came close enough that one of them nearly stepped on Ethan's backpack. None of them looked down. They passed him the way pedestrians pass a fire hydrant, an obstacle in the peripheral, accounted for without acknowledgement. He watched them go. His thumb moved down the cast again. A girl named Kayla, who Ethan had sat near twice at lunch, walked past with 2 other girls. She saw him. He saw her see him. She looked at his cast for a half second, long enough that something flared briefly in his chest. Some ember of hope, and then she looked back at her friends and said something that made one of them laugh, and the 3 of them walked on toward the bus line. He watched that too. 3 yards away, leaning against the brick wall near the main doors with a clipboard and a lanyard, stood Ms. Parrish, the 3rd-grade homeroom teacher. She saw the cluster of 4 boys walk past Ethan without stopping. She saw Kayla see him and look away. She was watching the parking lot the way adults who are responsible for the general situation watch things, tracking the big shapes, not the small ones. She looked at her clipboard. She made a note about something. She did not walk to the curb. 10 yards away, a parent, a broad man in a Carhartt jacket who was here for a 5th grader Ray would later never know the name of, had seen the whole thing. He had seen the boys walk past. He had stood there with his keys in his hand, and he had looked at Ethan on the curb for a moment, and then he had looked at his phone. It was into this particular scene, one small boy surrounded by people who were somehow not seeing him, that Ray Kowalski walked, and what Ray saw made him stop moving entirely. He stood still for a long moment. Something settled in him. Quiet, decided. He walked to the curb and sat down next to Ethan Cole. "Rough afternoon," Ray said. Ethan looked at him. Not startled, he had noticed Ray coming the way children notice adults who approach them directly, which is to say carefully, trying to determine intent. What he saw was a large man with a gray beard and a leather vest covered in patches, sitting on the curb next to him like this was the most ordinary thing in the world. "I'm okay," Ethan said. Ray nodded. He looked at the cast. He looked at the parking lot. He let the silence sit for a moment without filling it. "What happened to the arm?" he asked. "Fell off my bike." "Your own fault or the bike's?" Ethan thought about this seriously. "The coroner's fault," he said. They sat there. Around them, the parking lot was still emptying. Engines starting, cars pulling out, the school bus doors sighing shut. After a moment, Ethan said something that he said quietly, not quite a whisper, but close to one, as if he was trying the words out to see if they sounded as heavy out loud as they did inside. "Nobody signed my cast," he said. "I've been back 4 days." He looked at it the way he looked at things he needed to understand. Fully, without hurrying. "How long you been at this school?" he said. 3 weeks. "Before this school?" Terre Haute. Ray nodded slowly. He understood the shape of what he was looking at now. He reached into the pocket of his vest and found the marker he'd been carrying since the rally in Madison last summer. He uncapped it. "Can I?" he said. Ethan looked at him. Then he held out his arm. Ray signed his name, just Ray, in large clear letters near the elbow. Then, Next to his name, he drew something small, a motorcycle, 4 lines barely an inch long, the way a child draws a car. He recapped the marker. Ethan turned the cast and looked at it. His jaw did something complicated. "Thank you," he whispered. Ray put the marker back in his pocket. He sat there on the curb and thought about what 4 days meant. 4 days of walking into a classroom with a blank cast in a school where casts got covered. 4 days of holding your arm just right and having no one notice. He thought about Marcus. He let himself think about Marcus for exactly as long as it took him to make a decision. He stood up. "Stay here," he said. "I'll be right back." He found Miss Parrish near the main entrance, her clipboard against her chest, watching the last of the buses. Ray stood in front of her. He was not aggressive. He was simply very large and very present, and he let that do some of the work. "The boy on the curb," he said. "Ethan Cole. He's been here 3 weeks and nobody's signed his cast." Parrish looked at him with the careful neutrality that educators use with people they cannot immediately categorize. "We don't interfere too much in social dynamics at this age," she said. "Kids work these things out." "He's been here 3 weeks," Ray said again. "Boys are resilient," she said. Ray looked at her for a moment. He did not raise his voice. He did not say anything else. He turned and walked back to the curb. He sat down next to Ethan again. He took out his phone. He found a contact saved under 4 letters. He pressed call. It rang twice. "Millbrook, Indiana," Ray said. "Millbrook Elementary, Thursday afternoon." He listened. He said, "There's a kid." He listened again. He said one more thing quietly enough that Ethan couldn't hear it over the sound of the departing buses, and then he put the phone in his pocket. Ethan was watching him. "Who was that?" he asked. "Someone I know," Ray said. "Are they coming here?" "Yes." Ethan looked at him. "How many?" Ray looked at him steadily. "Enough," he said. They waited together for the bus. Ray asked about the bike, the one Ethan had been riding when he fell, and Ethan described it the way 8-year-olds describe the things they love, which is completely and without embarrassment, and Ray listened and asked real questions, and for 15 minutes on a curb in Millbrook, Indiana, it was just 2 people talking about motorcycles and corners and the specific physics of a front wheel slipping on loose gravel. The bus came. Ethan climbed the steps. He turned at the top and looked back at Ray. "Will you come back?" he asked. "Thursday," Ray said. Ethan looked at his cast, at the name written near the elbow, at the small motorcycle beside it, and he nodded, and the doors closed, and he was gone. That was Tuesday. Thursday came the way Thursday comes in September in Indiana. Clear sky, warm enough for a jacket to be wrong. The fields past the edge of town still green and going gold at the edges. At 2:38 p.m., 7 minutes before the final bell, the sound arrived. It arrived the way all large things arrive, first as a feeling, then as a sound, then as a fact. A kindergarten teacher in the East Wing felt it through the floor and thought it was a delivery truck. The custodian in the hallway stopped mopping and tilted his head. Miss Parrish, standing in her usual position near the main doors, looked up from her clipboard. Engines. They appeared at the far end of Cedar Road, which was the long, flat 2-lane that ran past the school, and they came in formation, 6 abreast, filling both lanes, a line that stretched back a quarter mile. Chrome catching September light. Black leather. Patches. 150 motorcycles moving together at a pace that was neither slow nor fast but deliberate. The way things move when they have somewhere specific to be and they intend to arrive. They turned into the parking lot one by one, or in pairs, or in tight clusters of 4, and they found spaces and they stopped their engines. And as each engine went silent, the overall sound diminished in waves, and then the last engine cut out, and there was silence. A silence more complete than anything a parking lot that size should have been capable of producing. 150 men and women on motorcycles in the parking lot of Millbrook Elementary School, and not one of them making a sound. The final bell rang. The doors opened. Danny Reyes was the first one off his bike. He was 61 years old, built like a man who had been doing physical work since he was 15, with a beard that was still mostly black and eyes that went perfectly still when they needed to. He walked to where Ray was standing at the edge of the curb, his steps easy on the asphalt. He looked at the boy. He looked at Ray. "You called," Danny said. We came. The children who came out of Millbrook Elementary at 2:58 p.m. that Thursday would not forget it. They would be 40 years old, and they would still be able to close their eyes and see it. They pushed through the double doors with their backpacks and their noise, and then they stopped. One by one, or in groups of three, they stopped and went quiet in a way that children rarely go quiet. The parking lot was full of motorcycles and the people who rode them, and every single one of those people was looking at the curb. Where Ethan Cole was standing, he had arrived at the curb the way he always did. Alone, early, his thumb moving down the plaster. He had seen Ray first. Then he had seen what was behind Ray, and his thumb had stopped moving, and his mouth had opened slightly, and he had not moved for a long moment. Ray walked to him. He crouched down so he was level with Ethan's eyes. "You said nobody signed your cast," Ray said. "I brought some people." The line formed on its own, the way things form among men who know how to organize without being told. Not a mob pressing forward, a line. Patient, orderly, as long as the parking lot required it to be. Danny Reyes was first. He produced a black marker from his vest pocket. He had come prepared. They had all come prepared. And he signed his full name in large letters near the top of the cast. And beneath his name, he wrote 4 words: Hell's Angels, Chicago chapter. Then the next man came forward. Then the next. They introduced themselves, not formally, just their names. Sometimes a chapter, sometimes just a city. They said things to Ethan that were short and plain. "Good to meet you, son. Nice cast. How'd you break it?" And Ethan answered them, each one, and his voice was steady. And he stood up straight. He had found something in the first 30 seconds, some interior thing that had been waiting for permission to surface, and it did not leave him. The line kept moving. The white plaster disappeared under ink, quarter by quarter from the wrist toward the elbow, and over it names in black and blue from whatever markers people had brought. Nicknames alongside real names. Cities: Peoria, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Louisville, Detroit. Small drawings alongside signatures. Eagles, flames, a compass rose, the same small 4-line motorcycle that Ray had drawn, now repeated 8 times by 8 different hands that had seen it and understood the reference. The 4 boys who had walked past Ethan on Tuesday were at a second-floor window. Kayla and her 2 friends were at the fence. Miss Parrish was standing in the doorway of the school, and she was watching, and she had not moved for 4 minutes. The line kept moving. By the time the last man stepped back, Ethan's cast was not white anywhere. Every inch of plaster was covered except for one small area on the inside of the wrist, a clean oval of white, left deliberately, the purple heart still visible inside it, the lines still slightly uneven, drawn quickly by someone who loved him. They had all seen it, and they had all understood, without being told, that it did not belong to them. Ethan turned the cast, slowly in the afternoon light. He looked at it the way someone looks at a thing they cannot fully comprehend the size of yet. He did not cry. He looked like he had been given something he had not known was possible to ask for. Ray stood up. He put his hand briefly on the top of Ethan's head, not ruffling his hair, just a steady hand placed there for a moment. Then he took it away. "See you around," he said. "You're leaving," Ethan said. "Got somewhere to be." He didn't say, "A memorial ride in Cincinnati for a man named Hector who died doing what he loved." He didn't say, "I have a son I carry with me every September." He didn't say anything else. He put on his helmet. He walked to his bike. The engine started. 1, then 3, then 20, then all of them. And the sound built back into that deep, full chord, and the line filed out of the parking lot in the same order it had arrived, and Cedar Road held them for a moment and then released them, and the sound faded down the long, flat road toward the horizon. And then it was gone. Ethan stood at the curb until he could not hear them anymore. His bus came 7 minutes later. He carried the cast on his lap the whole ride home, right arm cradling the left, the way you hold something you don't want to risk. He turned it slowly and read names he didn't know yet. Names he would spend the next several weeks memorizing without meaning to, the way you memorize the names of people who mattered. His mother saw it the moment he walked in. She was standing at the kitchen counter, and she looked at the cast, and she looked at her son's face, and she sat down slowly at the kitchen table and covered her mouth with her hand. "What happened?" she asked. "A man signed my cast," Ethan said, and then he brought his friends. The cast came off 6 weeks later. His mother asked him what he wanted to do with it. He put it on the shelf above his desk, between his bike helmet and a photograph from 3 moves ago, where he was laughing at something just before the picture was taken. It stayed there through the rest of second grade, and when the family moved again the following spring, as they always did, it went into the box marked Ethan's things and made the trip to the next town and went up on the next shelf. There are things you keep because you cannot let them go. There are things you keep because they are proof of something the world once told you wasn't real. Nobody signed his cast, and then 150 people did. If you've ever sat in a room full of people and felt completely invisible, or if you've watched someone sit alone and wished you had done something, leave that in the comments. Someone else watching tonight needs to know they're not the only one.